So welcome everyone to the Americas Supervisor Network. I think that they're all familiar faces. Hi Eva, good seeing you. Mary, welcome. But for people who are here for first time, the goal of the Americas Supervisors Network is to get everybody who is a supervisor or interested in supervision. People don't need to be supervisors to join these meetings. We meet once a month and we have different speakers to cover different topics. And today we have Larissa Thurlow from Calgary, Canada. So we are lucky, Larissa, to have you here today. And before we start, let's get to meet who is in the meeting today. So you want to go around and just say your name and where you're calling from. So one of our goals with Lily Sito, unfortunately, she may not be able to join us. She's with Peter Hawkins as a team building activity, but she may be attending as an observer. So I'm going to be facilitating today. So let's go around and let's say your name, because one of our goals is for people to get to know each other and also to support each other in the work that we do as supervisors. So this is our one goal is educational, and the other goal is networking and getting support for the work that we do. So let's go around, just say your name and where you're calling from.
Okay, I'll start. I'm Fiona, and I'm calling from just outside London in the United Kingdom, and it's a very wet, soggy day here. And I'm just thrilled to bits that you're doing this, Larissa. It's a very, very important topic.
Hi, this is Terry Hildebrand from Denver, Colorado, and I'm pleased to be here.
Hello, this is Kees from Amsterdam, and I'm also very pleased to be here.
Hi, I'm Diana from Mexico City. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Covington, right outside Washington, D.C.
Mary Jo Asmus, I'm from the west side of Michigan.
Francine jumping in between drilling from Denver, Colorado.
Philippe de Klerk from Belgium.
Michel from Paris.
Mary Crowley from Vancouver Island, British Columbia.
Sorry, Mary, cutting across you. I'm Lise from the west of England.
Jonathan Sibley from Montclair, New Jersey, and soon to be from New York City.
I'm Michael.
Lillian Abrams, still in New Jersey, near Jonathan, northern New Jersey.
Did anybody get that? No.
Sam McGill from Seattle, Washington.
Hello, this is Theodora Fitzsimmons from Washington, D.C.
And I'm Anne Oliveira Pinto from Lisbon, Portugal. Nice to meet you all.
Lynn Harrison from Whistler, Canada.
Oh, Whistler.
Hi, I'm Eva from Rio, Brazil. So far, the only one from the Southern Hemisphere, it seems. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so far, you're the only one. That's great to have everybody. I think that everybody introduced each other, or are we missing somebody? That Janine just came up, people are introducing, saying hi and where they're calling from.
Great. Hi, I'm Janine Bailey. I'm sometimes in Melbourne, Australia, and at the moment I'm in Doha, Qatar, in the Middle East.
Are we missing anybody? Seems that everybody say hi already. So well, welcome. It's nice to see that we have people from all over the world here today. And this is one of our goals is to bring awareness of coaching supervision in the Americas. But we want to be sure that this is an open network and we support each other and engage people from all over the world. So it's great having you, everyone. And today we are going to have with us Larissa. She's going to be talking about trauma in organizations and in the work, particularly of the supervisor. Larissa is a coach, a supervisor, and a learning and development professional whose curiosity and inner work has taken her into the exploration of trauma. She's a PCC certified coach and holds an EMCC practitioner level 2. Larissa has lived and worked overseas for well over a decade and is a self-proclaimed learning junkie. She currently lives in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and it's great to have you with us. I don't know if Larissa, is anything you want to share about you?
Yeah, I just doing those introductions has been amazing. It's great to see some very familiar faces from around the world and some new faces. So I'm really excited to have this session together today.
And we're going to be recording the session, Larissa, but if for any reason at the end of the session people don't want to share this recording in the website, it's okay. We have recording from all of our sessions for around 2 years. So there are around 15 to 20 recordings with really very interesting sessions with different speakers. So I want everybody to be aware that in our website, everybody have access to all of this information. So Larissa, if I will just leave you want to share the screen with your presentation?
Okay, it was right here, just one sec.
And meanwhile, I'm going to ask everybody please to turn down your microphone. Be sure that your microphones are off so they're not in the background.
Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, so yes, again, thank you everyone for being here today. Really, I want to start off and really set the intention here. It is certainly not my intention to come across as an expert in trauma. That is certainly not the case. But I have, experienced some things through supervision, both as a supervisee and as a supervisor, and I think it's a very important topic. So when Lily asked if I wanted to do a presentation, I wanted to come up with something that was a bit unique, a bit different, and personally important. So that's why I've come with this topic. Again, I really want us to learn together. I have some things to share, but I think there's probably a lot of expertise in the group, and that's what I'm really hoping to tap into. So a little bit later, we'll break into groups and have some discussion. Just before we get started though, just maybe doing some grounding work to come into the session, making sure that you're standing, sitting, whatever is good for you comfortably, and shifting your attention from thinking to feeling. That's really what this session we're going to focus a fair bit on, is that language of the body. And just taking a conscious moment to think of where you are and how you're coming into this call. So whatever works for you, I'm just going to give everyone a minute to kind of shift gears from whatever you might have been doing before the call and come into the call to participate fully. So I'm just going to take a deep breath myself. And as I'm doing that, I'm reminded of, the whole practice of mindfulness and how important that can be, but yet it also can be very triggering for certain people at certain times. And so that might be some of our conversation today is thinking about that. Here are kind of the main points that I wanted to come across, are kind of objectives for today. So really thinking about how we can work skillfully with someone who might be suffering from trauma or traumatic stress. Again, we'll go into this a little bit later. That isn't really our area of expertise. I'm not suggesting that it should be, but as we know, people come to our sessions, both coaching and supervision, as whole people, and they may be experiencing this. So how do we do well by our clients? That's really a question that I'd like us to take a deeper dive in today. And how do we provide that resourcing rather than triggering experience for clients or supervisees? Of course, unintentionally, but sometimes, things that might be said or discussed could potentially trigger people. So just thinking about that and having some discussion around it. Also thinking about what are the tools we need in our toolkit and how do we avoid at all costs doing harm. So that's kind of the lens that I want to be discussing through today. So I guess starting with a definition would be good. I think this is where I personally, and again, this is the main motivation for this conversation, is, my own personal experience. I guess I really struggled with that word trauma, and I thought, well, you had to be in a war-torn area, or it had to be something very, very dramatic. I guess I equated trauma with drama. And, so I've shared this definition here. Trauma is really, it can be those very severe situations, but it also is just an unprocessed kind of emotional situation that people can be going through life with. So I think we need to open up I know I certainly needed to open up my definition of what trauma is and realize that it is actually very common. So, coming across clients with trauma is not unheard of for sure. I just I'll pause there, just check and see if there's any questions or comments so far with the definition or anything that I've said so far. If anyone wants
a comment.
Yes, please.
I've heard people talk about the distinction between big T trauma and little T trauma.
Okay.
So what you're talking about, the big T trauma is, you were raped or in a war or something, but you're also talking about the little T traumas that we experience.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. And I think, those big T trauma things we're not in any, some of us on the call might be professionally qualified to deal with that, but, as supervisors, that's not it. But the little T trauma, it exists. And so how do we deal with that? So thanks for that distinction. Anything else coming up as we go forward? Okay.
I did want to say I just appreciated your distinction between trauma and drama. I'm thinking about that. And I'm also thinking that, the first definition says extrinsic agent. I just want to say what I'm thinking about with that. And I think sometimes it's how people take things. The same stimulus can be traumatic for one, depending on what it is. Maybe it has to do with what Jonathan just said about big T and little t, but it can be taken as traumatic by one person and not by another. So I'm just thinking about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Lillian. And that's a really important point. I think that there might be a bit of judgment that comes around this because, that's nothing, that's no big deal. But for no big deal for one person can actually be that little T trauma for another person. So that's a great addition to the conversation. Thank you, Lillian.
Could I also add the idea of vicarious trauma? Years ago I worked in a hospital with some very, very ill children, and I was traumatized by seeing families and children in deep distress. And I had to leave my job because of it. I wasn't supported. So vicarious trauma is very important, I think.
Thank you, Fiona. And as I was preparing this, I also was, which lens am I going to think about? As supervisors, if we're dealing with a lot of cases that are very intense and we're not getting supervision ourselves, that vicarious trauma, as you just described, that is a potential threat. So that's why I'm just kind of opening this up for us to explore together. I don't have any answers, but I think it's all very important things for us to be considering. So thanks for sharing that. I'll move us along then. So basically kind of thinking about what is that boundary. We're not necessarily psychologists or counselors, but how can we have trauma-sensitive or trauma-informed supervision? And I'm relying a lot on a gentleman by the name of David, I'm mixing up Peter Levine and David, it's at the end. I'm sorry, I've totally blanked out on his last name. Yes, thank you. Thank you. You got it. Yes, that's the one. Thank you. He talks a lot about this trauma-sensitive or trauma-informed coaching. he doesn't really speak about supervision, but I think we can extrapolate. So he has a four points that he kind of talks about that allow us to be trauma sensitive or trauma informed. And this is being used again in mindfulness classes, yoga, etc., where there's that potential for triggering. So one thing is just realizing how prevalent trauma, and that might be that little t trauma. So thanks again for that distinction, as well as the larger T. There's a lot of people that have been through the military and things like that come across our radar. So just realizing the widespread nature of trauma and trying to be on the lookout for those signs. So that's point number 2, being able to recognize those symptoms, and then being able to respond effectively. And responding effectively might, as we know, as part of our code of ethics, it might be referral. That's, how we can respond effectively. But there might be some other things that we can do as well. And then obviously the last one is trying to actively avoid re-traumatization. So knowing that things that we can do or say might be triggering, to think about avoiding those things. So I'm going to ask now, Damien, if I can ask for your help to set this up, because I'm really not sure how to do the breakout rooms. I'm thinking that if we could get into groups, and I'm not sure what number we're up to. When I last counted, I think we're around 20.
Well,
So I'm thinking,
we are now 26. How many people do you want in each group?
okay, so I'm thinking a group of, I guess 5 would be good. We'll have one group of 6. So we'd have 5 groups. Yeah. Or you know what? Let's do it groups of 4. That might be better. So 6 groups of 4 groups of 4 and 2 groups of 5. I think is what you're going to end up with there, Damien, if my math is correct. So what I'd like to do, and instead of sort of keep chattering at you, I'm going to ask that we break up into groups and just have a discussion. It's a little bit smaller, more intimate, to get a little bit deeper. There's 4 questions here. So. And again, there isn't necessarily a right answer, but just what are your experiences? So how do we know if trauma is an issue for a client? There's obviously sometimes that can be the presenting thing, but otherwise, how do we know? Second question, how do we ensure we're not making things worse? So what can supervision offer? And then what are the boundaries? I think that's a very important discussion for us to discuss. So how do we respect those boundaries while also respecting your client's needs? And then the last one, how do we know when someone is ready to do healing work, and if coaching supervision is in fact appropriate? Okay, I'm not sure if there are any questions. If those are pretty clear, I'll ask.
Larissa, is there a way that you can copy and paste them and put it in the chat room so people can read them?
You bet, yeah.
Okay, so while you do that, I already set up, we have 6 rooms with 4 or 5 people in each.
Okay.
So I'm going to wait for you to do, Catherine, copy and paste in the chat room, and after you do that, I will open the rooms.
Okay.
And people will have 10 minutes, and then you want one person to share with everybody else what
Correct.
conversations.
Yes.
Somebody.
Yeah.
Before we break out, could I just ask a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
When you talk about healing work, are you talking about outside of coaching and supervision, inside, both, or is that part of what we're discussing?
That's part of what you're discussing, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I can't seem to get to the, oh, here we go. Okay, sorry. Chat. I'm really sorry, guys.
It's okay.
Chat. And everybody, here we go. There.
Okay, great.
Should be there.
Yeah, there. Great.
Great.
So everybody, please choose. You need to go to your screen and press to get to the room.
Thanks, Damien.
No problem. And Larissa, you're also going to a group. I don't know if you want to be observer or participate. So kids, you need to choose, and Gregory, you need to choose the room so you can get into the room.
I did, but I went completely out.
Try one more time.
Okay. How do I get there?
Ready?
I don't know how to do this then. Oh, he's gone now.
So you need to, let me see if I move you to a different room. Let me move you to a different room.
Okay.
Can you see it now?
I didn't. No, I was meant for 5, room 5, but I lost that.
I invite you to a different one.
Okay.
The 6, so you can
Okay.
to be joining one of the other rooms. If you cannot join, just wait for us.
Okay.
That we learn to notice.
Thanks for sharing that, Fiona. It's sad to hear that that was your experience, and I'm hoping that, you know, more conversations like this, fewer people have to suffer through like that.
Sure.
Welcome, Gregory. How are you? I think you're just on mute.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm fine, thank you. Just I'm precising that I'm French. I'm working in the Caribbean. Would you remind me the theme you would like to? Would you remind me the question dedicated to that conference room?
Yeah, I will send it right now just to your chat.
So by the way, I want to tell you that we are recording this section here. So
Yes.
for you to know, everybody, that this is being recorded.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, just can you see the questions now, Greg?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Any thoughts from you, Lise?
Well, I was just really, what Fiona was saying was resonating with me as well, in terms of when I was younger, I was in social services, Fiona. My caseload wasn't children, it was elderly people, and I was very young, far too young to work with a more senior caseload, no supervision, and probably experienced very much the same as you. And I think there is something about not being aware. You feel absolutely emotionally, somatically, that things aren't right, but because you don't know enough about it, then you can't really react to it, or there's fear shows up in you, or you may react to it. I didn't in my case, and it doesn't sound as though you did either, Fiona. You may react to it in a way that you think you can deal with it because you want to be helpful, and of course that's even more dangerous for those individuals than withdrawing, although that's dangerous for us when we're not able to deal with those situations. But of course, I kind of think things have moved on now, and I've got a great example of, not from my own practice in terms of my supervision practice, but where I do some pro bono work with a women's centre fairly near here, where my daughter works actually. So she decided that she would invite me to support some of the women that are ready to move on. So the women come in, they're very traumatised, and they have excellent programs there. There's loads of training, there's loads of supervision, and I wouldn't be involved in that part of the program because I don't have that training specifically. And I think it's a wonderful way of approaching things, because my role comes at the end of the line, so to speak, when people have had their training, they've had support about their trauma, and then they're ready to move on and want to start a new life, because they've experienced substance abuse. They can't move on until that they've had this specific training, so that they are clean, as the word is called, but then they're ready to look at themselves and honour themselves and look at where they want to be in their lives, rather than what's happened to them. So I'm not sure whether this answers the questions or not, but it's something about, I think at the moment, sharing experiences in terms of where we're coming from. It takes longer than 10 minutes maybe to answer those 4 questions, Larissa. But anyway, that's my starter. I won't take up all the time.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I'm interested to hear more about that center. It sounds like they have a very thorough, comprehensive approach. So maybe afterwards I can find out if there's anything online or whatever. That would be great.
Definitely, and there's just been a research project done on one of the projects there.
Oh wow! Okay.
So you might be interested in seeing that as well. If it could be released, I'll check for you, Larissa.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Gregory, any thoughts from you?
I have. I'm a psychoanalyst and a good professional coach, and so I have some references to identify the trauma, and maybe my difficulty would be to remain in the boundaries of the supervision. My first reaction when it happens to have a traumatized client is to listen, and especially listen, and trying to find the right questions, but not the right questions to help them saying what they got to say. But once the session is finished, my advice would be to continue with a psychotherapist, or I can say that I'm there, that I can understand, that I can take the trauma in account in the context of the supervision, but the difficulty for me is to fix that boundary and to say, well, I'm not the psychoanalyst now.
Okay, yeah, I thank you for sharing. So it's interesting that you have that background as well, because supervisors all come from a different background. Some of them have that kind of background and could potentially offer help in that capacity. And obviously, there are many supervisors that don't have that. And so how do we find that boundary for everyone, I think is a good question. What have you found that has worked in helping you keep that boundary?
I think that it works. I think that the fact to keep the bound, you see if it works if your client goes and see a psychotherapist.
Okay.
And treat that with him.
Okay.
So sometimes it works. Sometimes I had to maintain the support, the reinforcement.
Okay. Lise or Fiona, any thoughts on this idea of the boundaries?
I had an experience a couple of years ago with a supervisee who was suddenly and unexpectedly very upset by one of her client's stories. And it turned out that it so mirrored her own experience as a child. I said to her, okay, I sense and I can hear and I can feel in my body some of your distress right now. What shall we do with this? How would you like to proceed? And she said, well, part of me wants to stay with you because I know you have a background as a psychotherapist, but I don't want it to interfere with our supervision. Can you suggest somebody I could see to work on this And she did. She went off for, I think, 2 months and came back when she felt more ready to carry not just the wound, but her understanding and her appreciation of what had triggered her. So now she knows she can be triggered, but she knows she can recover. I think that's a crucial thing, to know we can be triggered and know we can recover.
How to manage that, yeah.
So emotional regulation is what I'm talking about, really. And people could learn that in supervision.
So Larissa, would you ask for 10 minutes? We started in minute 22, we are in 31. Do you want me to make a warning of 1 minute, or do you want to keep going a couple of minutes more?
I think maybe just we'll wrap it up. I think coming together, we can expand the conversation.
Okay, so should I?
Is that okay with our group?
Yeah, there's always room for more.
Exactly. I was just going to go on to about boundaries, Fiona. So yeah, that's right. There's always room for more.
So what I want to add a comment to what I'm hearing is that there is also the trauma that can happen with natural disasters or terrorist attacks. That in some way we are all that can happen to a coach working and a supervisor if they're in the same community. So what can be interesting is what happens if they are both traumatized by the same event.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know Liz, Fiona in the UK sometimes breaks it. It's traumatizing some people too. You know,
said that bad word.
You know, Damien, we're laughing, but I do think that the definition of boundaries is really difficult.
Yeah.
We just use it so easily. It's, oh yeah, you know, we've got to exercise boundary management. But it means so many different things to so many different people depending on background.
Sure.
That's another issue, another area, Larissa, to keep exploring the boundaries.
Yeah. And did you have something else you wanted to add, Liz? And we only have a few seconds, but was there something else that you had?
Well, I think it would take longer than a few seconds. I was going to go on to talk about boundary management, but it may come up later on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries. No, we've never got enough time.
So we're waiting for a minute for Larissa to come back, to return.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. I know in our group we were, as always, a little frustrated that there was time was ticking down. There's lots more to talk about, but I thought, nice to bring it to the larger group because I think there's a lot of great conversations that can be shared. So if one person from each group could kind of come forward with some of the high points, that would be much appreciated.
Well, shall I start? Because the group is 2.
Okay.
Mary and I had a good talk about what I had experienced. And I think, how do we know? I think we don't. We cannot know that somebody has a trauma. Because knowing is afterwards, when somebody told you or something. But you could you could sense something, notice something, and then explore together what that is about. And it might be ending up in being a trauma. For the second question, was it how you can avoid making the mess? I don't know anymore, something, because I don't have the question in front of me. Yeah, I think that's our kind of job, to be explorative, very taking it easy, finding out what's going on. It depends also who has the trauma. Is it the supervisee or is it the client of the supervisee? I mean, because there's what supervision can really offer is helping the coach, the supervisee, supporting in their kind of approach and explore and finding a way to keep somebody safe. especially the one that has the trauma.
Yes, and I'm not sure if you're seeing, but in the chat room, Jonathan is adding, or indeed the supervisor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can all have a trauma.
Definitely.
But I had an operation on it and then it was over. So it's, you know, traumas are everywhere.
I really want to underscore what you're saying, Case, that I think as supervisors, we need to be conscious that the supervision of a situation where there perhaps is trauma is different from coaching a client who has trauma. It's not the same thing.
Can you say more, Sam?
Well, if our coaching client, our supervisee, brings a case to us as supervisors and says, oh my gosh, all this stuff is happening with my coaching client, I think they're traumatized, then I interact with how can this fine coach function and serve the client best.
Right.
If I am a coach working with a client who is traumatized, I'm working more directly with the trauma.
Right.
And as a supervisor, I have to be careful that I don't go there, that I don't try to fix the client, the coaching client. That's not my job.
Great, and you're alluding to you know, the question and the conversation around boundaries. I'm curious to hear from other groups what has come up. If anyone else can come on and share, please.
Well, we were talking about when to send some the supervisee to a different expertise to notice that there is something there, but it's also where he or she's working with a client in a parallel way where they are both immersed in the trauma. And we talk about what supervision can offer. And I think that we talk about difference between being in the mood of in the triangle of victim and trauma and dwelling on that, or just in not such a injured level, or not deep, because it could be deep, but not in the emotion and not in the mood. So that's maybe the difference between being able to supervise somebody that has a trauma, or to send him to somebody else or her to somebody with the expertise of dealing with the PTSD or the trauma, the T, small t or largely. It depends on the mood and how much is the client willing to see possibilities or not. If he's stuck, not seeing anything else, just seeing and living and reliving the trauma, this is not the case for us. This is a case that we should send to somebody, to an expert on that. So we talk about that, and Anna gave an example of somebody that she worked with, and that it was very helpful for the client to go and seek other kind of specialty and not working with a coach or supervisee or supervisor, and they just keep track, or she just kept track of how she was doing in that area. So it was very, very much as an examples, just putting examples out there to see where is the boundaries and where can we add. So if there's something I'm missing, please, Janine, Anna, please step in.
Thank you, Diana. Is it Diana or Deanna? Sorry.
It's the same. It's
okay.
The same. Yeah. Thank you, Larissa.
Thank you very much. And just noticing in the chat, Naomi is saying, as much as I want to help as supervisor or coach, my humility must steer how I choose to invite more from one being supervised or coached, and ask how I might be helpful. So that, you know, that the case, I think you said, how do we know for sure? We don't necessarily know unless there's an explicit conversation around it. And that might be the focus, but it might just come up incidentally, and it's that noticing, and then like you're saying here is asking, being curious, how can you be helpful, and always knowing that, where your limits are, your professional limits, and being able to refer. I know we haven't heard from all groups, and I know, Lise, you had, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you had something to speak more about boundaries. If you feel like you want to share that, please feel free. And anyone else who hasn't had a chance to share what came up in their group, I'd love to hear from you.
I think I was just suggesting that we use the word boundaries, and we have clearly in our own mind our own definition. Personally, what I found is it's difficult when you start talking about the actualities of boundaries. It all depends on your own experience, doesn't it, at the end of the day, where you feel that you're coming from in terms of your expertise, whether you can help somebody or whether you do feel the right thing is to refer on. But I think the biggest challenge that I find as a supervisor is from coaches who really think they can help, and they're coming from a good place, they're coming from a positive place. However, that emotion of theirs overrides any rationality about whether they're actually equipped to help. And that can take quite a long discussion, because there's quite a barrier to saying, well, actually, maybe somebody else has got more experience than I have, and maybe my client would be better off with somebody who can help. But when you start to kind of define boundaries, it kind of gets a bit tricky, and I would love to hear from people about, what their thoughts are, because I don't think that there's a clear-cut definition of boundaries. It's contingent on so many complexities within the relationship and with who we're talking about and everything else that goes with that. So, yeah, I just find it a real challenge, and one that can't be taken lightly.
Yeah.
And just kind of swiftly go, yeah, well, of course, if it's not working out, then you refer people on. But what is not working out? Even if we're not trained or qualified in psychotherapy, there's obviously some behavioural issues that we can be equipped to work with. Mm-hmm. Anyway, there's more to say on this, but this was the gist of where I was coming from.
If I could add a comment from our group, Larissa?
Yes, please.
That I think it depends on what's in the room now, Lise, maybe, and what is referring to a trauma from the past. This is a distinction I know I've worked on as a supervisor and as a coach. Like, there's the emotions in the room now, and there's how much and how deep, and do you need to go back into what the originating trauma was. And that we talked about, because two of the people in our 3-person breakout group were clinicians. About, I think you feel more comfortable with that if you have some clinical training. About maybe you could push that boundary a little bit further.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, Lillian, and I think it's, I don't know, it's kind of become probably a bit of a get out of jail card in terms of when you talk about if it's a past issue, then it's clearly something for a counsellor or maybe a therapist to help with. Well, I think it's more complex than that. I'm just talking about my experience, but I do use that, Lillian, in the training in terms of, you need to have some delineation on it. But talking with us as a peer group, I'm enjoying going a bit deeper into it rather than using the textbook definitions.
And in our group, I think we did discuss the competence of the supervisor to not only understand what's going on, but that self-management piece in interaction with what can be very emotional. But Jonathan also brought up an important piece about appropriateness. And is this part of what we have contracted for? Is this part of our contractual relationship? Where does this fit in the bigger scheme of things? And then similarly, is the urge to refer, or are we being too gentle? Perhaps there is a potential there to raise a question or to offer an observation about, and let the client decide rather than us making the choice for them.
Great point, Francine. Thank you. I do have some more slides I want to share that touch on this, but I want to make sure we're having a rich conversation. So, I mean, that's to me where the value is. So I don't want to cut anyone off if you haven't had a chance to share yet. Is there any group that wants to, or any individual that wants to?
I'd like to add to what Francine shared from our group, just the general idea that as supervisors, we can help people figure out if there's something they don't know that they don't know. But then we have to do that for ourselves as well. So that's why a discussion like this is so important, I think, in terms of even being able to think about, do we automatically refer out? Do we ignore referring out? How do we make these decisions? So I think it's great that we're doing this, and there's probably room for more of this so that we can serve our supervisees in cases like this.
Yes, definitely. I know an hour is certainly not long enough to do full justice to this topic, but I thought, just sharing it and the conversations that evolve from there, hopefully, I already know I'm going to hound Lise to hear more about the work that the pro bono work she's doing, because it sounds like they have a really good approach there, and I'm sure there's lots of synergies happening. I'd also draw your attention to the chat box. I won't take time to kind of read through it because I want to keep us going, but there are some great comments here from Sam and from Janine that I think would be helpful for you guys to look at. If there's no one else, is there any group that has, Fiona, you have your hand up, please go ahead.
Just a quick comment to say that I'm very taken up with the idea that we've all got attachment styles. And some of us are insecure, some of us are anxious, and that can show up in how we relate as supervisees and as supervisors. And very often, if it's a very anxious attachment style, there's trauma there. So I just wanted to link trauma with attachment.
That's very helpful. Yeah, I hadn't really made that connection, so thank you for that, Fiona. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think what came up in our group were is around boundaries and also how we perceive the situation. So what is our own training, what is our own orientation, our own bias towards it. So we had a kind of a robust discussion about if you have a psychology background or whether you have a learning approach, which I have, and how that can orient our own supervision or our own coaching of the clients. I think further to that, is there ever a session that there isn't some sort of trauma, whether it be big T, small t, or micro t, showing up as part of the connection with the issue? Is any issue not emotionally related in some sense? And in that sense, how do we contract in terms of boundaries? How do we continually contract to find out if this is where the client wants to be? And what is this where they want to spend the time working on?
And I would add to that in Fiona's comment by saying, as supervisors, it's a pretty good idea to understand our own TA drivers, transactional analysis drivers. Am I somebody who is mostly inclined to please others, to go fast, to work hard? All of these things can push us in a particular way of responding to the situation that the supervisee brings to us.
Yeah. Yeah, a very, very complex, you know, when you think about all the different pieces of it, very complex, and obviously, as I said, deserves further attention and further discussion. I'm going, if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to move us along just so that we can finish on time. But hopefully this has sparked, you know, some conversations that will continue, and yeah, I'm hoping that this isn't the end of this discussion by any means. So let me just share my screen again. Sorry, one second. So we haven't really talked about, one thing that really comes for me in this also is, you know, we've talked a fair bit. Is everyone able to, I just want to check, everyone able to see the slide?
Yes, yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Just the ethics. So, you know, some things that you guys have already mentioned, your own intuition. So is this something that you can hold? And, you know, to Lillian's point of not necessarily, you know, what I'm talking about is what's happening in the room. You know, is this emotion, is this whatever is showing up, is this something that you can hold? We also have, as we know, we talked about a bit, the ICF, or EMCC, whatever school you belong to, there are ethical responsibilities not to go deeper if we're not trained. Some of you mentioned the future focus. Just, you know, being clear that we don't need to know the story. We don't need to get into the whole, you know, what caused the small t, big T trauma, to be able to support people, to be there and hold the space. And then thinking about always having those referrals on hand. You know, I recently, you know, when I moved back to Canada, it took me a little bit of time to actually find those referrals. So making sure that you're well positioned to support your clients is important.
Larissa, may I jump in?
Yes, please, Eva.
That slide, please. Because that's that's something we discussed in our group, and I brought in the definition functional or dysfunctional. It's not only of being past focused. Sometimes the client is future focused, the conversation is present or future focused. However, you have signs that the person is not functioning in their lives. And I think this is an element for us. It's a red light, be it the supervisee or the coachee.
That's
conversation, because it's not just looking back.
Yeah, that is a very good distinction. That functionality and how they're coping or not coping is important. So thank you for adding that.
Yeah, because to some extent there is this restorative part of supervision if we just stay in supervision. So it's quite normal that there is a space for that, and I think we have to admit it. But the problem is, how is that affecting the person's life other than work? So that's something for us to investigate, I think.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. So just a little bit more that I had on boundaries. You know, there are, as we mentioned, I think there are points along the continuum depending on both experience, both willingness, ability to go there. So, you know, maybe you're avoiding any kind of personal discussion or personal material, and then there's the other end of the spectrum. And I think that's the main point there. The first one is that's co-created, and I notice now that there's a typo, I'm sorry about that, in the relationship. So, you know, how are we going to be together? Have we contracted for this? Do we need to recontract? Is really something important. So in the kind of reading that I've been doing around this, and again, you know, I'm just reading, I'm not an expert here, so any sharing that people want to do, that's great. But I've come to the conclusion here that there are sort of three factors that seem to have a bearing on how the boundary is created. So it's either the client can sort of shape that boundary through their own, whether they're bringing that, whether they're resourceful, the supervisor, all of these parts play into this. The supervisor, based on their competence, based on their perception, and then there's there's also obviously the organizational contract that might shape the boundary, and interplay between those three. And there might be other things that shape that boundary. I think this is a discussion that and learning that just needs to deepen. But those are the three things that seem to be the big pieces for me. The first question that I asked you, and I'll sort of slowly wrap up here because I know Damien wants to have a couple minutes to finish off. But the first question that I asked was around, how do you know? And I think Case said, well, you don't really know, and that's true unless someone has explicitly said that. But it's that point around noticing and really observing. So if the client isn't coming specifically, they haven't explicitly talked about that, there's the work of Dan Siegel around the window of tolerance, and it's noticing the hyper and the hypo pieces. So that might be the really anxiousness, looking away, things like that. Also, there might be on the other end of the spectrum, there's just flatness, numbness, etc. So it's not necessarily that we're diagnosing, oh, I see this, so therefore, it's trauma. Obviously not. That's not our job, but it's just to be that, noticing and curious and asking questions to see if the person is feeling safe. It's about that space of being, as you mentioned, Eva, creating that kind of space where people can function within the session, and then hopefully, obviously, outside, larger in their life. There's lots more that I want to say and would love us to discuss, but I know that Damien wants to talk to you. So just thinking about the body, the cognitive, and the emotional pieces there, this will be shared, the slides, and then I'll just move on to the resources that, that people could take a look at. So I'm sorry that we're not able to fully get into some of this, but I think there are a lot of really great resources out there, including all of us on the call. And I can just leave that up on the page for you to take a look further into, and I'll hand it over to Damien to wrap us up. So thank you very much, everyone. I knew it was a lot to cover in our time together. I think we've just sort of scratched the surface, and hopefully there'll be more discussion and thought around this together. I think you're on mute, Damien.
I was. Thank you, Larissa. That was a great presentation. Would you mind copying and pasting this in the chat room so people can copy and paste it? Maybe it will be easier.
You sure? Okay,
Larissa, great. That was a really great presentation. Thank you for taking the time. And I want to invite everybody to consider presenting next year. We already have scheduled for the rest of the year. Next month on October 14th, Terry is going to be doing a session on marketing issues. Terry, are you there? Do you want to share briefly about what you're going to be talking on marketing issues next month, so people get
Yeah, absolutely. So I think many of you know or are also involved in the marketing mastermind group that's been going on for a couple of years. And we'll be talking about some of our learnings and some of our next steps and how we can continue to all promote coaching supervision in the Americas.
Great, and that will be October 14th, so you want to save the date. In November, we have Casey Breeze, who is also here, who's going to be talking about ethical issues coming up. Then in December, we are going to have a session on resistance to supervision, the presentation with Lily that we presented at Oxford Brooks. And we are starting to get the schedule for next year. So I want to invite everybody who is interested in presenting to let us know. And I want to briefly share with you a couple of updates about the conference coming up next year, May 7th and 8th. We are also confirmed 2 days of TA after the conference. So if anybody is interested in learning more about TA, transactional analysis, we have Karen Pratt coming from South Africa, especially to do a 2-day training on transactional analysis. And this is going to be for a smaller group of participants. So if you are interested, as soon as we come out and Mary Crowley is here, you will hear from Mary, who is helping Lily, and we are a team, 3 of us, putting together this conference. So Mary is the one who's going to be receiving your calls for proposal if you're interested in presenting. She's going to be also in charge of registration, so you may be in communication with her. So thank you, Mary, for being here today and for being willing to work with Lily and me and putting together again the 3rd year conference. So we will be, and I remind people, call for proposals are out. The deadline is October 1st, so it's only 2 weeks. If you are interested in presenting, just to be sure that you send the abstract on time. And in terms of other announcements, in the website, as I said at the beginning, there are all of the recording from past sessions. If anybody have an issue or a concern about posting this presentation today in the internet and YouTube, let me know, and we will not do that. But if not, we post all of our recordings in our website. Also, we have a registry if you're interested in having your profile so people can find you as a supervisor. That's also available. And I want to thank everyone for being here today. It was great to see you. If you want to raise something before we go in the chat room, briefly for Larissa, any comment, any feedback you want to give her or anything you want to share with the community, we don't have time for everybody to share verbally, but if you want to write down a couple of comments or notes in the chat room before we go, feel free to do that. And Larissa, again, thank you very much for a great session. And thanks everybody for being here today, and look forward to seeing you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Next month. Bye-bye. Thank you, Larissa.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Larissa, bye.
Thanks, Larissa. Great to see you.
You too. Take care.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Larissa.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.
So Gregory, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from